What's up, guys? Welcome back to the Cullico YouTube channel, where we do all things fabrication, engineering, and design. In today's video, we're going to be building a 1mm CP1 titanium X muffler system. I'm going to show you guys exactly, step by step, how we build this system, from the inlet collector to the outlet X collector, the canisters, and then the packing and the perforated cores. For those of you that are new to this channel, this is the new bike that I just finished up, the KC1200. This is actually the second set of exhausts that I built for this project. This is going to be a quiet muffler system. The first set was a straight pipe system similar to MotoGP, much louder, much more radical, cool in its own way. I wanted to have two different systems so I could run the bike loud or quiet, and it also offers a slightly different power curve. So let's dive right in and start building this titanium X muffler system. So these are all the materials we're gonna use to build this rear muffler section. So we've got tubing, reducers or reverse cones, pie cuts, and sheet metal, and all of this material is 1mm CP1 titanium. First, we'll start with our tubing. The bigger stuff here is 3.5-inch OD, and this is what we're gonna use for our canisters or our mufflers, and you can see that I've already got it marked out in 8-inch lengths, and that's gonna be our muffler length. And we'll take our billet end caps here at the very end, and those will be inserted into this tube to complete the muffler. Next, we've got our 1 7/8 tubing, and this is going to be used in combination to our 1 7/8 pie cuts as our inlet collector, the very beginning of this rear muffler section. We'll end up using short lengths of this, and it'll get expanded up over our headers, which are also 1 7/8 OD. Next, we'll move on to our sheet metal section here, and this is where things get a little trickier. You can see that I've got different shapes marked out on the sheet metal, and what this is actually gonna be is tapered cones and reducers to make this back section of the X muffler system. And all this will make more sense when we start assembling it all and rolling it, but I wanted to give you the basic premise of what we have going on here. So before we get started here, don't let any of this stuff overwhelm you, the tapered cones, the reducers, any of this. We're gonna go through it step by step, and it'll start making sense once we start rolling the cones and assembling the components, and this thing starts taking shape. So let's get started. All right, so I want to pause here, and before I go any further, I want to give you a little update. We've rolled the tapered cones, we've rolled the reducers, we've cut some of the tubing. So I'm going to start tacking this stuff up, and you're going to see here real shortly how it's going to start taking shape. So I'm going to Scotch-Brite my seams here a little bit on these sheet metal parts where I had to cut them with the Beverly shear and then sand them true, a flat surface. One thing I wanted to tell you guys earlier is the pie cut stuff. You can make it yourself out of straight tubing and a horizontal bandsaw, but I get all of my pie cuts pre-made and pre-cut from Tacking Industries. So I'll tack most of this stuff up without filler, and then some of the parts with like some sprung resistance, I'll use a little filler on the tacks. I always put 4 tacks per seam. Alright, so for the tapered cones, I just usually use simple hose clamps to clamp the seam together so I can tack it. And then for the reducers, I have 2 vice grips holding it together. All right, so we got a couple parts tacked up here, and you can start visualizing how this X system is going to be assembled. So first, what we have is going to be the inlet collector, in which we're using 1 7/8" OD tubing. We've got a couple straight runs and 2 pie cuts per side, which is going to get merged together into an inlet collector. And then once it X's, we're going to use our tapered cones that we're going to merge together like this for the rear side of the X system. And then our small reverse cones are going to be positioned here. We're going to get that additional bend in the back with our 2.5-inch pie cuts. And then we're going to use our reducers to reduce down from the canisters. So obviously it's very busy right now, but as we start moving through this, you're going to visualize and be able to see how it all comes together when we start making our cuts and merging the collectors together. But this is the basic flow of it. All right, so I'll give you guys a close-up here before I move forward. You can see the 1 7/8" OD tubing on the inlet collector with the 2 pie cuts we used. That's going to get merged together as one. And then we're going to take our tapered cones here, and this is going to be the back side of the X system. That's going to get merged together as one. You can see our little reverse cones here, which will reduce down going into the canister. And then you can see the custom reducer pieces we made that will transition the back side of the X up to the canisters. So it looks pretty busy and complicated right now, but it's going to start taking shape here real soon. All right, guys, a couple hours have went by. We haven't made a ton of progress, but I like our setup better. The reason it took a while is because I rebuilt our tapered cone section through here. After working with it a little more, I wanted to make the cones a little longer, and I wanted to make the OD on the back side a little larger. So I bumped us up from 2.5 to 2.75. So we should be good to go now. I like this setup. As you can see, I also fit our reducers to our canisters. So in front of me, we now have all of our major components built for our titanium X muffler system. We have the inlet collector, the X back collector with the tapered cones, and our canisters. So now the process moving forward needs to be kind of methodical. You know, when to start making your angle cuts to merge this stuff together. What seams should be welded first, X, Y, Z. So right now I'm actually gonna pause and I'm gonna start welding a bunch of these seams. I'm gonna weld these up here. I'm gonna weld all the tapered cone seams, the canister seams, because when it's all welded together and it's more of a solid unit, making these long angle cuts to merge them together as a collector is a lot easier. Sometimes if they're just tacked, the bandsaw or whatever you're using to cut it will actually break the tacks apart and then you'll have a problem. I wanted to show you guys another quick close-up of the parts before we start welding. All right, guys, we're welding. We're starting out with the canisters here. As you can see, I have the back purge connected in the back, and I'm running about 5 CFH through this part right now. You want to run back purge so the underside of that weld, when you're welding it, is shielded with gas to keep it clean, strong, and free of contaminants. As for welder settings right now, I'm running 35 amps on the machine, 35 CFH through the torch, and about 12 seconds of post flow. Titanium is kind of sticky by nature, so you can't slide it in from the front or the side like you can steel alloys. It's sticky, so you got to make sure that you're dipping right into the puddle. Be precise with it. Alright, so here's a close-up at the first canister. And here is the second canister. This one's pretty nice. Very consistent white gold weld all the way around. Sweet. So our canisters are welded and our inlet tubes are welded. Let's move on to the tapered cones. I'm just welding away. One cone down. Looks pretty darn good. You can see the reverse cone is on the end. And we've got another cone to weld, which I'm gonna start right now. And then we'll start making some cuts and merging this stuff together. But everything's going pretty good. I'm getting a little low on argon. Titanium takes so much argon to make it nice with the back purge and how much post flow we're running and the CFH through the nozzle. But we'll get there. Let's keep cruising. Where's my glove at? Missing a glove, missing a glove. Where you at, buddy? On the toolbox. Please hold. Let's keep cruising. $23, $24, $25. I'm a counter. I like to count when I'm welding. Keeps your cadence consistent and it keeps your start and stops consistent. So based on the material and the seam and what I'm trying to do is how many dips I'll do. We'll rock another 25 here. Two, 23, 24, 25. All right, so you'll see our initial components are all welded up. And I have some tentative cut lines marked out on the inlet collector and the exit collector to cut on the bandsaw to start merging these parts together. Next to it is the open race exhaust that I built for the same bike not too long ago, so I'm using that as a reference as well. Similar inlet collector, X collector rear, but no mufflers. So the important cuts are done to merge these parts together. I've just got it roughly assembled here on the table, but now you can start really visualizing what the end product is gonna look like when this is all done. I know this is kind of a busy setup, but I'm doing my best to show you every part of this step by step. If there's something that isn't clear, put it in the comments below and I'll do my best to answer it right away. I know this is a lot of information and steps all at once. I would say that the most critical part of this setup right here was the cuts we just made on the bandsaw. These long angle cuts to merge the X collectors together. It's not going to be perfect. You're not going to hit it spot on. This is pretty darn close, but I've done this a few times. You got to be comfortable on a bandsaw. You could do it with a cutoff wheel or an angle grinder. Anything that'll cut the titanium. I've just found that the bandsaw all in one shot is certainly the easiest for me. But it's a little dangerous on that thing. Your fingers are close to the saw and you got to be careful. Anytime you're making these collectors, give yourself a little extra material. Don't try and cut it spot on. It's a little wide right now because I left a little material so I can sand up on it with the belt sander to get it true, because we're going to want these seams in here with these long angle cuts to be super true and flat. So that's going to be our next step, is truing these all up on the belt sander so they'll come together really nice and flush so you can put a beautiful weld on these long seams. You can see the assembly now. I'll show you up close in a second, but let's keep rolling. Here's the part up close. You can see these are the long angle cuts, collector cuts we just made on the bandsaw, both on the inlet and the exit. And we'll be sanding these next to true them up real nice. But you can kind of visualize what this thing's going to shape up like. We just sanded all of our X collector components flat and true. So now what I did is I pulled the tapered cone backside of the collector through the canisters and tacked them up. You can see I put tacks around here, and now this will be ready to be finish welded. So you'll see the two halves that we just sanded will come together like this. Pretty neat looking. And the order in which we do this stuff is important, like I said earlier. So now we're going to want to finish weld these two seams. If I put them together first and weld this seam, I won't be able to get the welder in here to weld these. So it's just, you know, you got to be mindful of the order you do stuff so you can make sure that you can weld it. Secondly, our inlet collector halves are sanded true, and they'll come together real nicely like this to make that beautiful inlet collector. Now you guys can really see how this stuff comes together. So what we'll do here is we'll tack this up next, and then we'll finish weld this, and then we'll move on to the next parts, which are cutting these to join the two halves of the X together. Quick update here, we've now welded the two collector sections together. Kind of wild looking. This back section is crazy. I'll show you close up as well, but we've got the muffler section welded, we've got the inlet collector welded, and now the last step is gonna be to merge these two together. So we're just gonna make two cuts, and we're getting close here. So here are the two parts close up. A pretty radical setup. Some close up of the welding. And then you can see where I have it marked out, where I'm going to make the first cuts to try and merge these together. All right, so I made the cuts on both parts. And you can see how I ovalized the inlets so they would mate up nice. And I trued them up on the sander. And we're ready to tack this thing together and then finish weld it. Final weld seam of this project where we're actually welding the inlet and the exit collectors together. I figured we could hang out while I do this final weld seam. And then all we got to do is build our muffler cores and put muffler packing in, and this thing's going to be done. So let's keep rolling. So our finished welding is complete. Now we're gonna build some muffler cores for this thing. Final step here, we gotta build some perforated cores. And you probably saw earlier on in the video, these end caps floating around. These are billet end caps, 6061 black anodized that I have made. I use these specific end caps a lot for the race systems that I build. So we're gonna use them in this application. Here I've got our perforated that I just cut out. This is 304 stainless steel perforated sheet that I get through McMaster Car. I've got it cut dimensionally to size so we can roll it into shape for a 2-inch core. So we're gonna run 2-inch cores here. So the core is gonna slide over the end cap here, and then it's gonna butt up against the reverse cone on the inside. We're actually gonna weld the perforated core to this inlet part, and this taper is gonna butt up against the reverse cone on the inside of the exhaust here. So it's gonna be a 3-piece system: end cap, perforated tube, and then this inlet part. But we'll trim this down, and you'll see here in a second what it looks like. So let's roll these. We've got our perforated cores rolled into shape, and now I'm gonna tack all this together. I just use hose clamps to pull this together at the seam and then tack it. So we have our perforated cores tacked up and tacked to the inlet piece, and they slide into the muffler like this and butt up against the reverse cone on the inside, and the end cap secures it and is fastened in the back with 1024 screws. Lastly, We're gonna take this string packing and pack around the cores on the inside of the mufflers, and this thing's gonna be done. Mufflers are packed, end caps are in. This is our finished product. That's going to conclude our video today on how to build an X muffler system out of titanium. Thank you for watching. I really appreciate it. I hope you guys were able to learn something. And as always, I'm rooting for you on your fabrication journey. And we'll see you next time on the Cully Co. YouTube channel. See you later.